Ryan's seemingly perfect life shatters when he uncovers his wife's infidelity. But the betrayal is only the beginning. As their marriage crumbles, Ryan's world takes a darker turn when a manipulative figure from her past begins to stalk and threaten them. With his family's safety on the line, Ryan must navigate a web of danger, deception, and emotional turmoil. Will he protect his daughter and reclaim control of his life, or will the chaos consume them all? This is a gripping tale of betrayal and resilience that will keep you on the edge of your seat until the very end. It was a crisp autumn evening in 2023, the kind that made you nostalgic for something you couldn't quite name. The small New England town of Hartfield was alive with the rustle of leaves and the golden glow of porch lights. Tucked away on Chestnut Drive stood the Harper family home, a cozy two-story with ivy climbing the brick facade. It looked like the picture of suburban perfection. Inside, Ryan Harper sat at the dining room table, his laptop open, eyes scanning over a spreadsheet. Ryan, in his mid-30s, had the look of someone who spent more time worrying about others than himself. His neatly combed brown hair and button-down shirt hinted at his orderly nature. He was the kind of person you'd describe as reliable, though some might call him predictable. His wife, Emily, leaned against the kitchen counter a few feet away, scrolling through her phone. Emily had a quiet elegance about her. Her dark hair was pulled into a loose bun, and she wore the soft cardigan that Ryan had bought her for their anniversary last year. She was the kind of person who always seemed to fit the moment, a calm presence in the chaos of life. Their 9-year-old daughter, Lily, sat cross-legged on the living room floor, meticulously colouring in her sketchpad. Lily was a burst of energy wrapped in a whirlwind of creativity. She had inherited Emily's deep brown eyes and Ryan's stubborn streak. Ryan glanced up from his laptop. "How's the art project coming along, kiddo?" Lily didn't look up, her tongue poking out in concentration. "It's almost perfect, Dad." Emily chuckled softly. "Almost perfect sounds like someone's inherited your work ethic." Ryan smiled, the warmth of his family grounding him. "Well, someone has to set the bar high around here." The scene felt ordinary, the kind of simple joy that Ryan treasured. But even as he watched Emily laugh with Lily, there was a flicker of something else, a shadow of unease that Ryan couldn't quite place. That night, as Ryan lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, his thoughts wandered. Things had felt different with Emily lately. Not bad exactly, but off. She'd been spending more time out of the house, running errands that seemed to take longer than usual. She was more distant, her laughter less frequent. Ryan brushed the thoughts aside, blaming his own overthinking. They'd been married for over a decade. Life was bound to ebb and flow. The next morning, Ryan's routine began like clockwork. Up at 6, coffee brewed, and dressed for another day at the marketing firm where he'd worked for years. Emily was already in the kitchen when he came downstairs, sipping tea and scrolling through her phone. "You're up early," Ryan said, kissing her cheek. "Couldn't sleep," she replied, her tone light, but her eyes distracted. "I thought I'd get a head start on the day." "Anything exciting planned?" he asked, pouring himself a cup of coffee. Emily hesitated, just for a moment. "Oh, just running some errands, might stop by the gallery." The gallery was Emily's passion project, a small art space she co-owned with a friend in town. It had been her dream to bring a bit of culture to Hartfield, and Ryan had always admired her for pursuing it. "Well, have fun," he said, grabbing his briefcase. "Let me know if you need anything." As Ryan drove to work, Emily lingered in the kitchen, her tea untouched. She stared at her phone, her thumb hovering over a name in her contacts. After a moment, she sighed, locking the screen and placing the phone face down on the counter. She pushed the nagging thoughts aside. Today wasn't the day for regrets. At work, Ryan found it hard to focus. His mind kept drifting back to Emily. He tried to shake it off, telling himself he was being ridiculous, but by lunchtime, he couldn't resist. He sent her a text. "Thinking about you. Hope your day's going well." The reply came minutes later. "Busy at the gallery. Talk later." Ryan stared at the message, trying to ignore the strange weight in his chest. Emily had always been thoughtful, her replies warm and engaging. This felt distant, dismissive. Even he told himself she was just busy, but the feeling lingered. When he got home that evening, the house was quiet. Emily wasn't in the kitchen, and Lily was at a friend's house for a sleepover. Ryan found her in the bedroom, brushing her hair in front of the vanity. "Hey," he said, leaning against the doorframe. "How was the gallery?" Emily glanced at him through the mirror, her smile faint. "Productive. We're planning a new exhibit." "That's great," he said, stepping closer. "You've been working so hard on it." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Yeah, it's been a lot, but it's worth it." Ryan hesitated, watching her. He wanted to ask her if something was wrong, if she was okay, but the words stuck in his throat. Instead, he kissed her shoulder and left the room, telling himself it was just a phase. The days turned into weeks, and the distance between them grew. Emily's phone buzzed more often, and she'd step away to take calls or respond to messages Ryan tried not to notice, tried not to let his imagination get the better of him. But late at night, when he was alone in bed and she was still downstairs, he couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling. Then one Friday evening, as Ryan was finishing up a work report, Emily announced she was heading out. "Where to?" he asked, trying to sound casual. "Just meeting some friends for drinks," she said, slipping on her coat. "Don't wait up." Ryan nodded, watching her leave. He trusted her. Of course, he trusted her. But that night, as the clock ticked past midnight and she still wasn't home, trust began to feel like a fragile thing. When Emily finally walked through the door, her cheeks flushed from the cool night air, Ryan was still awake. He didn't ask where she'd been. He didn't have to. The faint smell of cologne lingered on her coat, a scent that wasn't hers. Ryan woke up the next morning to find Emily already in the kitchen, humming softly as she poured herself a cup of coffee. The sight would have felt normal if it weren't for the events of the night before. The faint trace of cologne still lingered in his mind, as sharp as a knife's edge. He hesitated at the doorway, watching her. She looked peaceful, like nothing had changed. And maybe, Ryan thought, he was overthinking it. But deep down, a part of him knew better. "Morning," Emily said, noticing him. Her voice was light, almost too light. "Coffee?" Ryan nodded, stepping into the room. "Yeah, thanks." She handed him a mug, her fingers brushing his for a fleeting moment. For years, that simple touch had been enough to ground him today. It felt hollow. "So, how was last night?" he asked casually, testing the waters. Emily didn't flinch. "It was fun, just the usual, catching up, a lot of laughing, you know how it is." Ryan smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Glad you had a good time." But as she turned back to her phone, scrolling through messages with a small smile, Ryan's mind raced. He needed to know. He needed to understand why this felt so wrong. Later that day, Ryan did something he never thought he'd do. He checked her phone. It sat on the counter while Emily was upstairs, the screen dark and innocuous. His heart hammered as he unlocked it, the passcode something she'd never thought to hide. The messages were there, all of them. Short exchanges with a name he didn't recognize. Zach. At first, they seemed harmless. Meeting times, inside jokes. But the further he scrolled, the worse it got. The laughter, the affection, the subtle flirtation. Ryan's stomach twisted. He placed the phone back on the counter before Emily came downstairs. For the rest of the day, he couldn't meet her eyes. She didn't seem to notice. The following week, Ryan tried to act normal, but the cracks were showing. He spent longer hours at work, throwing himself into projects to keep his mind off the gnawing betrayal. When he was home, he avoided Emily's gaze, her touch, her presence altogether. She noticed, of course, but rather than confront him, she seemed to lean further into her distractions, her phone, her gallery, and presumably Zach. One night, after Emily had gone to bed, Ryan sat in the living room, staring at the darkened television. His mind replayed every moment of their relationship, searching for where things had gone wrong. Was it him? Had he become too complacent, too predictable? Or had she simply changed? He opened his laptop and began searching. Who was Zach? A quick Google search revealed more than he expected. A local artist who'd recently had his work featured at the gallery. The connection was obvious. Ryan dug deeper, his stomach sinking with every discovery. Zach wasn't just an artist. He was charismatic, successful, and single. Everything Ryan felt, he wasn't. The next day, Ryan made a decision. He wasn't going to sit idly by while his marriage unraveled. If Emily was drifting away, he needed to know why. He needed to know if there was still something worth fighting for, or if it was already too late. He waited until the weekend when Lily was at a sleepover. That evening, as Emily prepared for another gallery meeting, Ryan stopped her at the door. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. Emily froze, her hand on the doorknob. "Now." "Yeah," Ryan said, stepping closer. "Now." She sighed, setting her bag down. "Okay, what's this about?" Ryan hesitated, his mind racing with all the things he wanted to say. But when he looked at her, really looked at her, his resolve hardened. "Who's Zach?" Her face shifted, the lightness draining away. For a moment she looked almost guilty. Then, just as quickly, she recovered. "He's just a friend," she said too quickly. Ryan nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. "A friend you message late at night? A friend you spend hours with at the gallery?" Emily crossed her arms, defensive now. "I don't see why this matters." "It matters because you're lying to me," Ryan said, his voice rising slightly. "You're lying, and I don't know why." Emily's jaw tightened. "I'm not lying." "Then what is it, Emily? What's going on between you and Zach?" She didn't answer. The silence between them stretched, heavy and suffocating. Finally, she spoke, her voice low. "I don't know." Ryan blinked, stunned. "You don't know?" "I don't know how to explain it," she said, looking away. "It's complicated." "Try," Ryan said, his voice hardening. "Because right now, it looks a lot like you've checked out of this marriage." Emily flinched at his words, her eyes brimming with something Ryan couldn't quite place: regret, anger, guilt. Maybe all three. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean for it to get this far." Ryan's chest tightened. "So, it's true?" She nodded, a single tear slipping down her cheek. "I didn't want to hurt you, Ryan, I swear." "But you did," he said, his voice breaking. "You already did." Emily sat on the couch, burying her face in her hands. Ryan stood there for a long moment, watching the woman he thought he knew crumble in front of him. He wanted to comfort her, to tell her they could fix this. But another part of him, the part that had been shattered by her betrayal, couldn't move. "I think you should go," he said finally, his voice cold. Emily looked up, her eyes wide. "Ryan." "Go," he repeated, his tone leaving no room for argument. She left without another word. Ryan sat in the empty house, the silence pressing in on him like a weight. His mind replayed the conversation over and over, each word cutting deeper than the last. He didn't know what to do. All he knew was that nothing would ever be the same again. To be continued, Don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe to my channel for the next part of this story. Ryan woke up the next morning in an empty bed, the sheets beside him untouched. The house felt cavernous, every sound amplified in the stillness. Emily hadn't returned. For a moment, he wondered if she ever would, but the thought brought no relief, only a hollow ache. The faint smell of her perfume still lingered on the pillow, a cruel reminder of the life they'd built, and the secrets she'd kept. He went through the motions of his morning routine, each step heavier than the last. Coffee tasted bitter, the silence more oppressive than comforting. Lily would be home later that day, and Ryan knew he couldn't let her sense the growing storm between her parents. For her, he'd have to act normal, at least as normal as he could manage. But beneath the surface, the wheels in his mind were turning. He couldn't ignore what Emily had said, or what she hadn't. The truth was out now, and Ryan couldn't sit idly by while the pieces of his life crumbled around him. That afternoon, Emily returned. She walked through the door with the air of someone bracing for impact, her shoulders tense, her steps hesitant. Ryan was in the kitchen, washing dishes, his back to her. "I didn't know if you'd come back," he said without turning around. Emily placed her bag on the counter, her hands trembling slightly. "I didn't know if I should." Ryan dried his hands and turned to face her. "What do you want, Emily? To pretend this didn't happen, to pick up where we left off and hope it goes away?" She looked away, guilt and shame written across her face. "I don't know." He let out a sharp breath, his frustration barely contained. "That's not good enough. Not anymore." Emily's eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry, Ryan. I never meant to hurt you. I felt so lost, so distant." "And Zach?" he asked, his voice sharp. "What did he do make you feel found?" "It wasn't about him," she said quickly. "It was about me, about us. I've been unhappy for so long, and I didn't know how to tell you." Ryan stared at her, his chest tightening. "So instead of talking to me, you talked to him. You let him into our life, our marriage." Emily's silence was answer enough. Ryan shook his head, his hands gripping the edge of the counter. "Do you love him?" "No," she said softly, her voice barely audible. "But you don't love me either," he said, the realization hitting him like a punch to the gut. Emily flinched but didn't deny it. That hurt more than any words could. "I think you should go," Ryan said finally, his voice steady but cold. "For good this time." Emily's tears spilled over as she nodded, grabbing her bag and walking to the door. She paused, looking back at him one last time. "I'm sorry, Ryan." But he didn't respond, and she left. For the next few days, Ryan threw himself into work, trying to drown out the chaos of his personal life. He avoided calls from well-meaning friends and family, unwilling to explain what he was going through. The only light in his life was Lily, who seemed blissfully unaware of the growing rift between her parents. But even Lily couldn't distract him from the gnawing pain. Every quiet moment was filled with memories of Emily, of the life they'd built together, now reduced to ashes. He tried to focus on what came next: divorce papers, custody arrangements. But the thought of tearing their family apart made his stomach churn. One evening, as Ryan sat alone in the living room, his phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "Ryan, it's Zach. Can we talk?" Ryan's blood ran cold. Of all the people in the world, Zach was the last person he wanted to hear from. His first instinct was to ignore it, but something inside him, curiosity, anger, or maybe both, made him reply. "What do you want?" Zach responded almost immediately. "I want to apologize and explain." Against his better judgment, Ryan agreed to meet him. They chose a neutral location, a coffee shop downtown. Ryan arrived early, his jaw tight and his fists clenched. He didn't know what he expected from this meeting, but he knew it wouldn't bring him peace. When Zach walked in, Ryan sized him up instantly. He was tall, with an easy confidence and a charming smile that made Ryan's stomach turn. This was the man Emily had chosen, even if only briefly, and it made Ryan hate him all the more. "Ryan," Zach said, extending a hand. Ryan didn't take it. "Let's get this over with." Zach nodded, taking a seat across from him. "First of all, I want to say I'm sorry I never meant to come between you and Emily." Ryan scoffed. "You didn't just come between us, you destroyed us." Zach's face fell. "I know, and I hate that, but you need to know. Emily was struggling long before I came into the picture." Ryan leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "And you thought you could fix her? Save her?" "No," Zach said quickly. "I didn't want to fix her, I cared about her, and I think she cared about me too. But I swear, it's over now." Ryan's fists clenched under the table. "Do you expect me to thank you for that? For walking away after you've already ruined everything?" "No," Zach said, his voice firm. "I don't expect anything, I just wanted to face you, to take responsibility." Ryan stared at him for a long moment, his emotions warring inside him. He wanted to lash out, to make Zach feel even a fraction of the pain he'd caused. But instead, he stood, his voice cold and steady. "You've done enough, stay out of our lives." Zach didn't argue, simply nodding as Ryan walked out of the coffee shop without a backward glance. The confrontation didn't bring Ryan the closure he'd hoped for. If anything, it only deepened the wound. But as he drove home, he realized something. Zach wasn't the enemy. Emily had made her choices, and so had Ryan now. It was up to him to decide what came next. The following weeks were a blur of lawyers, paperwork, and difficult conversations. Ryan filed for divorce, determined to protect himself and Lily from any more pain. Emily didn't fight him, signing the papers with quiet resignation. It was a bittersweet ending to a chapter that had once held so much promise. But even as the legal process moved forward, Ryan struggled to find his footing. Nights were the hardest, the silence of the house reminding him of what he'd lost. He threw himself into his work and spent as much time with Lily as possible, trying to rebuild a life that felt like it had been shattered. One evening, as he tucked Lily into bed, she looked up at him with wide, curious eyes. "Dad, are you and Mom going to be okay?" Ryan's chest tightened, but he forced a smile. "We're going to be just fine, sweetheart, I promise." And for the first time in weeks, he believed it. The weeks after the confrontation with Zach were marked by a tense, fragile silence. Ryan had thought filing for divorce would bring some relief, but instead, it left him feeling hollow. Emily moved into a small apartment across town, and they worked out a co-parenting schedule for Lily. Every interaction with Emily was polite but strained, a shadow of the life they had once shared. But the quiet didn't last long. One evening, as Ryan was going through some old photo albums with Lily, a knock at the door broke the calm. He wasn't expecting anyone, and the sound immediately set him on edge. He told Lily to stay in the living room as he walked to the door. Opening it, Ryan's stomach dropped. Emily stood there, her face pale and eyes wide with panic. "We need to talk," she said, her voice trembling. Ryan stepped aside, motioning for her to come in. Emily glanced nervously at the living room, where Lily was flipping through photos, oblivious to the tension. "What's going on?" Ryan asked, his voice low. Emily took a deep breath, her hands wringing nervously. "It's Zach." Ryan's chest tightened at the name. "What about him?" "He's been calling me showing up at the gallery," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "At first, I thought he was just trying to talk, to work things out, but it's more than that. He's been following me, Ryan." Ryan's jaw tightened. Are you saying he's stalking you? Emily nodded, tears welling in her eyes. I didn't know who else to turn to. I'm scared, Ryan. For a moment, Ryan didn't know how to respond. Every instinct told him to protect her, to keep her safe. But another part of him, the part that still stung from her betrayal, hesitated. You need to call the police, he said finally. This is serious, Emily. I did, she said quickly. They told me to file a report, but they said unless he does something overt, there's not much they can do. Ryan ran a hand through his hair, his mind racing. He hated Zach more than ever now. Not just for what he'd done to Ryan's marriage, but for the fear he was now causing Emily. I'll help, Ryan said, his voice firm. But you need to tell me everything. When did this start? What exactly has he been doing? Emily took a shaky breath and began recounting the incidents. It started with text messages, friendly at first, then increasingly insistent when she didn't respond. Then there were the unannounced visits to the gallery, where he'd linger and try to corner her into talking. Most recently, she'd noticed his car parked outside her apartment late at night. Ryan's blood boiled as he listened. Zach had already taken so much from him, and now he was terrorizing Emily. Whatever lingering anger Ryan felt toward her was quickly overshadowed by a fierce need to protect his family. We're going to put a stop to this, Ryan said, his voice steady. I'll make sure of it. The next day, Ryan took action. He installed security cameras around Emily's apartment and insisted she stay with him and Lily until the situation was resolved. Emily was hesitant at first, but the relief on her face was undeniable. For the first time in weeks, Ryan felt like he was regaining some control over the chaos Zach had unleashed. But Zach didn't back down. A few nights later, as Ryan and Emily were sitting in the living room discussing next steps, Lily called out from the upstairs window. Dad, there's a car outside. Ryan's heart dropped. He rushed to the window, Emily close behind. Sure enough, a dark sedan was parked across the street, its engine idling. Ryan couldn't see the driver, but he didn't need to. He knew it was Zach. Without a word, Ryan grabbed his phone and called the police. As they waited for officers to arrive, he kept a close eye on the car. Emily paced behind him, her anxiety palpable. What if he tries to come in? She whispered. He won't, Ryan said, his voice firm. Not while I'm here. The police arrived quickly, their flashing lights illuminating the street. As they approached the sedan, the car sped off, leaving a trail of tire marks behind. One of the officers took a statement from Ryan and Emily, but it was clear they couldn't do much without direct evidence of a threat. That night, Ryan barely slept. He stayed up, pacing the house, his mind racing with thoughts of what Zach might do next. For the first time in his life, he felt genuinely powerless, and it terrified him. The next morning, Ryan made a decision. He couldn't sit around waiting for Zach to make his next move. He needed to confront him, to put an end to this once and for all. Using the contact information he'd found months ago, Ryan tracked down Zach's address. It was a modest apartment on the edge of town, far less impressive than Ryan had imagined. He parked a block away and approached the building, his heart pounding in his chest. When Zach opened the door, his expression shifted from surprise to smug satisfaction. Ryan, he said, leaning casually against the doorframe, to what do I owe the pleasure? We need to talk, Ryan said, his voice cold. Zach stepped aside, motioning for him to enter. The apartment was cluttered, with half-finished paintings leaning against the walls and empty beer bottles scattered across the table. The sight only fueled Ryan's anger. This ends now, Ryan said, turning to face him. You leave Emily alone. You stay away from my family, or I swear, I'll make you regret it. Zach smirked, his confidence infuriating. You think you can scare me, Ryan? You think you're the hero in this story? Ryan stepped closer, his fists clenched. This isn't a game, Zach. You've already done enough damage. Walk away before it gets worse. Zach's smirk faltered, just for a moment. For the first time, Ryan saw a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes, but it wasn't enough to stop him. Emily came to me, Zach said, his voice low. She wanted something you couldn't give her. That's not my fault. Ryan's vision blurred with rage, but he forced himself to stay calm. This isn't about what happened between you and Emily. It's about what's happening now. You're stalking her, harassing her. And if you don't stop, I'll make sure you pay for it. Zach took a step back, his smirk replaced by a scowl. Get out. Ryan didn't move. Stay away from her. Stay away from us. With that, he turned and walked out, leaving Zach standing in the doorway. As Ryan drove home, his hands trembled on the steering wheel. The confrontation hadn't gone the way he'd hoped, but at least he'd made his stance clear. Now all he could do was hope Zach would listen, but hope wasn't enough. The next day, Emily called Ryan in a panic. Zach had shown up at her gallery, causing a scene. He'd shouted at her in front of clients, accusing her of lying and manipulating him. It was the final straw. Ryan drove straight to the gallery, his anger boiling over. By the time he arrived, Zach was gone, but the damage was done. Emily sat in the back office, her face pale and tear-streaked. I'm done hiding, she said, her voice trembling. He's not going to scare me anymore. Ryan nodded, his resolve hardening. Neither of us will let him. They went to the police again, this time with video footage from the gallery's security cameras. The evidence was enough to file a restraining order, and officers assured them they'd take immediate action if Zach violated it. For the first time in weeks, Ryan felt a glimmer of hope. They weren't powerless anymore. They were taking back control. As the days passed, Zach's presence faded. The dark sedan no longer appeared outside Emily's apartment, and the phone calls stopped. Ryan and Emily began to rebuild. Not their relationship, but their lives. They weren't the same people they had been before Zach, but maybe that was okay. Maybe they were stronger now. And as Ryan tucked Lily into bed one night, her sleepy smile warming his heart, he realized something. No matter what they'd lost, they still had each other, and that was enough. The tension reached a boiling point. The following weekend, Ryan had just finished cleaning up after dinner when Emily's phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. She glanced at the screen, her face tightening as she read the message. It's him, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Ryan walked over, his heart pounding. The message was short, but chilling. We're not done. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Ryan grabbed his phone and called the police, his voice steady but filled with determination. He's violating the restraining order, he told the officer. We need someone here now. The wait felt excruciating. Emily paced the living room while Ryan stood by the window, watching for any sign of Zach. Outside, the street was quiet, but the tension inside the house was suffocating. When the police arrived, they took a statement and reviewed the message. The officers assured Ryan and Emily that they would increase patrols in the area, but the lack of immediate action only fueled Ryan's frustration. He felt helpless, unable to protect his family from a threat that lurked just out of reach. That night, sleep was elusive. Ryan sat in the living room, his mind racing with thoughts of what Zach might do next. Every creak of the house made his pulse quicken, every shadow outside a potential threat. Emily sat beside him, her knees drawn to her chest. I hate this, she said quietly. I hate that he still has this power over us. Ryan placed a hand on her shoulder, his grip firm but reassuring. He doesn't, he said. Not anymore. We'll end this. The next morning, Ryan decided to take matters into his own hands. He contacted Evelyn Burke, the no-nonsense lawyer who had handled their divorce. He explained the situation, laying out everything Zach had done. This isn't just harassment, Ryan said. This is stalking. He's dangerous. Evelyn nodded, her expression sharp and focused. We'll file for an emergency protective order, and if he violates it again, we'll push for criminal charges. Hearing her confidence gave Ryan a renewed sense of purpose. For the first time in weeks, he felt like he was taking back control. But Zach wasn't done. 2 nights later, Ryan was woken by the sound of shattering glass. He bolted upright, his heart pounding as adrenaline surged through his veins. Emily was already on her feet, her face pale with fear. "Stay here," Ryan said, grabbing the baseball bat he kept by the bed. He crept downstairs, his grip on the bat tightening with every step. The living room window was shattered, shards of glass glittering on the floor. Outside, a dark figure stood near the edge of the yard, barely visible in the dim light. "Zach!" Ryan shouted, his voice echoing into the night. "You've gone too far!" The figure hesitated, then turned and ran. Ryan sprinted to the door, but by the time he reached the yard, Zach was gone. All that remained was the sound of his retreating footsteps and the cold weight of fear settling in Ryan's chest. When the police arrived, they took photos of the damage and promised to increase surveillance in the area. But their assurances felt hollow. Zach had proven he wasn't afraid of the law. He wasn't afraid of anything. The next day, Ryan made a decision. He couldn't wait for the system to protect them. He needed to confront Zach one final time, to put an end to this nightmare. He tracked Zach to his studio, a small, run-down space on the outskirts of town. The door was slightly ajar, and inside, the air smelled of paint and turpentine. Ryan stepped inside, his heart pounding. Zach was there, sitting at an easel with his back to the door. He didn't turn around as Ryan approached, but his voice was calm, almost amused. "I was wondering when you'd show up." Ryan clenched his fists, his anger boiling over. "This ends now." Zach turned, a smirk playing on his lips. "You keep saying that, but here we are." "You've crossed every line," Ryan said, his voice shaking with fury. "You've terrorized Emily, put my daughter in danger, and for what, to prove some twisted point?" Zach's smirk faded, replaced by a cold, calculating glare. "You don't get it, do you? Emily came to me. She wanted out of your perfect little life, and I gave her that." "Whatever she wanted, it's over now," Ryan said. "And if you don't stop, I'll make sure you regret it." Zach stood, his posture tense. "You think you scare me, Ryan? You're just a guy who couldn't keep his wife happy." Ryan stepped closer, his voice low and deadly. "Maybe I couldn't, but I'll protect her and my daughter, no matter what it takes." For a moment, neither of them moved. The tension was electric, the air thick with unspoken threats. Then Zach laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. "You're not worth it," he said, turning back to his easel. "Neither is she." Ryan stared at him, his anger simmering just beneath the surface. Then he turned and walked out, leaving Zach alone in the dimly lit studio. When Ryan returned home, he found Emily and Lily sitting on the couch, their faces tense with worry. He sat down beside them, his shoulders heavy with exhaustion. "It's over," he said, his voice steady. "He won't bother us again." Emily looked at him, her eyes filled with relief and something else. Gratitude. For the first time in months, Ryan felt a sense of peace. The storm had passed, and though the damage was done, they had survived. As the days passed after Ryan's final confrontation with Zach, the tension that had gripped their lives began to ease, but only slightly. While Zach hadn't made another move, Ryan couldn't shake the feeling that the situation wasn't over. He stayed vigilant, his eyes constantly scanning for any signs of trouble. Emily, too, was on edge, her every movement shadowed by unease. Then, one quiet evening, the phone call came. Ryan was tucking Lily into bed when Emily rushed into the room, Her phone clutched tightly in her hand. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with fear. "It's him," she whispered, holding out the phone. Ryan took it, his jaw tightening, as he listened to Zach's voice on the other end. It was calm, almost chilling in its composure. "Ryan, I thought we understood each other," Zach said. "But you've made this so much harder than it needed to be now. I don't have a choice." "What do you want?" Ryan growled, his voice low and dangerous. Zach chuckled, the sound sending a shiver down Ryan's spine. "I want Emily. I want what's mine." "She was never yours," Ryan snapped, "and she never will be." There was a long pause, then Zach's voice turned cold. "You'll regret this, Ryan, both of you." The line went dead. Ryan handed the phone back to Emily, his mind racing. Zach's words weren't just a threat, they were a promise. And Ryan knew he couldn't wait for Zach to make the next move. The next morning, Ryan and Emily met with the police again, this time with a renewed sense of urgency. The officer in charge of their case, a no-nonsense woman named Detective Harper, listened carefully as Ryan recounted the phone call. "This is escalating," she said, her tone serious. "We'll assign a patrol car to your neighborhood, and I'll see what we can do to track him down. But you need to be prepared. If he shows up, don't engage. Call us immediately." Ryan nodded, but his resolve was firm. If Zach came near his family again, Ryan wouldn't stand idly by. That evening, the family settled into an uneasy routine. Lily was distracted by a movie in the living room, blissfully unaware of the danger lurking outside Ryan, and Emily sat in the kitchen, their voices low as they discussed their next steps. "I can't believe this is happening," Emily said, her hands trembling as she sipped her tea. "I should have seen it sooner, I should have—" "This isn't your fault," Ryan interrupted, his voice firm. "He's the one who crossed the line and we're going to stop him." Emily nodded, her eyes glistening with tears. For a moment, they sat in silence, the weight of the situation pressing down on them. Then, the sound of shattering glass broke the quiet. Ryan shot to his feet, his heart pounding as he grabbed the baseball bat he kept by the door. Emily grabbed Lily, pulling her close as Ryan moved toward the source of the noise. The front window was shattered, shards of glass glittering on the floor. But it wasn't just the broken window that made Ryan's blood run cold. It was the brick lying in the middle of the room, a piece of paper tied around it with a rubber band. He picked it up, his hands trembling as he unwrapped the note. The message was scrawled in jagged handwriting. "This isn't over." Ryan clenched his fists, his anger boiling over. He called the police, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. Within minutes, Detective Harper arrived, her face grim as she surveyed the damage. "This is a clear escalation," she said. "We'll do everything we can to find him, but you need to be careful. He's unstable." Ryan nodded, his jaw tight. "I'm not waiting for him to hurt my family." Harper placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "We're doing everything we can. Just stay alert." The hours that followed were a blur. The police increased their patrols, and Ryan and Emily did everything they could to fortify the house. But no matter how many precautions they took, the fear lingered. A constant shadow in the back of their minds. Then, late one night, the final confrontation came. Ryan was jolted awake by the sound of the back door creaking open. He grabbed the baseball bat and crept downstairs, his heart hammering in his chest. Emily followed close behind, her phone in hand, ready to call the police. In the dim glow of the kitchen light, Zach stood in the doorway, his expression cold and menacing. "Ryan," he said, his voice calm but laced with venom. "You should have stayed out of this." Ryan stepped forward, his grip on the bat tightening. "Get out of my house." Zach smirked, taking a step closer. "You don't scare me." "Maybe not," Ryan said, "but you're not getting near my family." The two men stared each other down, the tension crackling like electricity. Then, with a sudden burst of movement, Zach lunged forward. Ryan swung the bat, the force of the impact sending Zach stumbling backward. He recovered quickly, his eyes blazing with fury as he charged again. The two men grappled, their movements a chaotic blur of rage and desperation. Emily stood frozen in the doorway, her hands trembling as she fumbled with the phone. "The police are on their way!" she shouted, her voice shaking. Ryan managed to shove Zach away, his chest heaving as he raised the bat again. "It's over, Zach!" But Zach wasn't done. He lunged again, his movements wild and unpredictable. This time, Ryan was ready. He swung the bat with all his strength, the impact sending Zach crashing to the floor. As the sound of sirens filled the air, Ryan stood over Zach, his breath ragged and his body trembling with adrenaline. Emily rushed to his side, her hands clutching his arm as the police stormed into the house. Zach was handcuffed and dragged away, his threats fading into the distance as the officers led him to the patrol car. Ryan and Emily stood in the kitchen, their arms wrapped tightly around each other as the chaos finally subsided. For the first time in weeks, the house was quiet. But this time the silence felt like a relief, a promise of peace. Ryan looked down at Emily, his voice soft but steady. "It's over." She nodded, her tears spilling over as she clung to him. "Thank you." As they stood there, holding each other in the aftermath of the storm, Ryan realized something: their lives would never be the same. But they had survived. And no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The aftermath of Zach's arrest didn't bring the immediate peace Ryan and Emily had hoped for. While Zach was finally in custody, the emotional weight of the past weeks lingered like a storm cloud over their lives. Emily moved back into her apartment to start rebuilding her independence, while Ryan focused on providing stability for Lily, who was beginning to sense the strain on her parents. 1 week after Zach's arrest, Ryan received an unexpected call from Detective Harper. "We've got a problem," Harper said, her voice tight. "Zach posted bail this morning." Ryan's grip tightened on the phone. "What? How is that even possible? He broke into my house." "I know," Harper replied. "But until his trial, he's free, as long as he adheres to the restraining order." Ryan's jaw clenched. "You really think he's going to follow it?" "I'm not here to speculate," Harper said. "But I am here to remind you to stay vigilant. If you see him anywhere near you or Emily, call us immediately." Ryan hung up, his mind racing. He immediately called Emily to warn her. "He's out," Ryan said, his voice filled with urgency. Emily's silence on the other end of the line was deafening. "What do we do?" she asked finally, her voice trembling. "We stick to the plan," Ryan said. "We stay alert, and if he shows up, we call the police. He's not going to win, Emily. Not this time." But Ryan's reassurances did little to ease the tension. That evening, as he sat in the living room while Lily played upstairs, he couldn't shake the feeling that Zach was still lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. The next few days were quiet. Too quiet. Ryan and Emily fell into a state of hypervigilance, checking windows and doors multiple times before going to bed, jumping at every unexpected noise. The stress was palpable, weighing on both of them in different ways. Then, one night, the nightmare reignited. Ryan was walking through the house, double-checking locks before bed, when his phone buzzed with a text. The number wasn't saved, but the message chilled him to the bone. "Miss me." He showed the message to Emily the next morning, her face paling as she read it. "This has to stop," Emily said, her voice trembling with anger and fear. "We can't keep living like this." Ryan nodded, his own frustration boiling over. "I'll take it to the police again. Maybe they can trace the number." Detective Harper was equally concerned when Ryan showed her the message. "This is harassment," she said. "And it's a clear violation of the restraining order. We'll do everything we can to track him down." but Zach was always one step ahead. While the police investigated, Ryan's life became a constant balancing act, protecting his family while trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy for Lily. He couldn't help but feel like he was failing on both fronts. Then, one rainy afternoon, everything came to a head. Ryan had just picked Lily up from a friend's house when he noticed a familiar car parked near his driveway. It was subtle, half hidden behind a row of bushes, but there was no mistaking it. His heart pounded as he parked in the garage and ushered Lily inside. "Go to your room and start your homework," he said, trying to keep his voice calm. "I'll be up in a bit." Once Lily was upstairs, Ryan grabbed his phone and called Emily. "He's here," he said, his voice low but urgent. "I'm on my way," Emily said without hesitation. Ryan hung up and dialed the police, explaining the situation to the dispatcher. Then, unable to sit still, he walked to the front window and peered outside. The car was still there, its windows dark, its presence an unmistakable threat. Minutes felt like hours, as Ryan waited for both Emily and the police to arrive. When Emily finally pulled into the driveway, Ryan rushed out to meet her. "You shouldn't have come alone," he said, his voice filled with worry. "I wasn't going to let you face this alone," Emily replied, her eyes scanning the street. Suddenly, the car's engine roared to life. The vehicle pulled out from behind the bushes and sped toward them, its tires skidding on the wet pavement. Ryan grabbed Emily and pulled her out of the way, just as the car swerved onto the sidewalk, missing them by inches. The car screeched to a halt a few yards away, and the driver's door flew open. Zach stepped out, his face twisted in rage. "Stay away from her!" Ryan shouted, stepping between Zach and Emily. Zach smirked, his eyes cold and unrelenting. "You think you've won? You don't even know what winning looks like." Ryan clenched his fists, every muscle in his body tensing. "You're done, Zach. The police are on their way, it's over." But Zach didn't back down. Instead, he took a step closer, his voice low and menacing. "You think a few cops scare me, I've got nothing to lose." Emily moved to Ryan's side, her hand gripping his arm for support. "You already lost, Zach," she said, her voice shaking but defiant. "I'm not afraid of you anymore." For a moment, Zach froze, as if her words had struck a nerve. Then the sound of approaching sirens filled the air, and his smirk faltered. Zach turned back toward his car, but before he could get in, the police arrived. Officers surrounded him, guns drawn, their commands sharp and authoritative. Zach raised his hands, his expression a mix of anger and resignation, as they handcuffed him and placed him in the back of a patrol car. As the officers took statements from Ryan and Emily, the tension that had consumed them for weeks began to dissipate. For the first time, it felt like they could breathe again. Later that evening, as Ryan and Emily sat on the couch, exhaustion written across their faces, Emily reached for his hand. "Thank you," she said softly. Ryan looked at her, his expression unreadable. "For what?" "For standing by me. For protecting me and Lily, even after everything." Ryan nodded, his grip on her hand tightening. "We're a family. That's what we do." The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There were still wounds to heal, trust to rebuild. But as they sat there, united in the face of the storm they had weathered, Ryan felt something he hadn't in a long time: hope. The days following Zach's arrest were a strange mix of relief and apprehension. Ryan, Emily, and Lily began to adjust to a semblance of normalcy, but the memory of the confrontation lingered in the background, like a shadow that refused to fade. While Zach remained in custody, awaiting charges for violating the restraining order and attempted assault, Ryan knew the legal process could drag on for weeks, even months. But for now, the house was quiet, and life was inching back towards something that resembled peace. One evening, Ryan and Emily sat at the kitchen table, a pot of tea between them. Lily was upstairs, working on a school project, her laughter occasionally drifting down the stairs. It was the first time in weeks that the house had felt warm, alive. "Do you think it's really over?" Emily asked, her voice low but steady. Ryan hesitated, his hand tightening around the teacup. "I think he's finally out of moves. The police are watching him, and he knows it, but we'll stay prepared, just in case." Emily nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I don't think I've ever felt so free for the first time. I don't feel like he's lurking around every corner." Ryan looked at her, a small smile playing on his lips. "That's because he's not. You took your power back, Emily." Her eyes met his, and for a moment, the distance that had grown between them over the years seemed to shrink. "I couldn't have done it without you." The moment was interrupted by the sound of Lily bounding down the stairs, a poster board in her hands. "Dad! Mom! Look at this!" She placed the project on the table, her face beaming with pride. It was a collage of pictures, drawings, and words that described her family. At the center was a photograph of the three of them from years ago, smiling in front of a pumpkin patch. Ryan felt his throat tighten as he looked at the collage. It wasn't just a school project. It was a reminder of everything they were fighting to protect. "That's amazing, Lily," Emily said, her voice filled with warmth. "You did such a great job." "Thanks," Lily said, bouncing on her toes. "I'm going to get an A for sure." Ryan laughed, ruffling her hair. "I think so too, kiddo." As Lily ran back upstairs, the tension that had weighed on Ryan's chest for weeks seemed to ease just a little more. Maybe, just maybe, they were going to be okay. But the calm was short-lived. The next day, Ryan received a call from Detective Harper. Her tone was serious, and Ryan's stomach dropped as soon as he heard her voice. "We've had a development," Harper said. "Zach posted bail again this morning." Ryan's grip tightened on the phone. How is that even possible? He violated the restraining order. "I understand your frustration," Harper said, her voice measured. "But the judge granted him bail under strict conditions. He's being monitored, and he's not allowed to contact you or Emily." "That didn't stop him last time," Ryan said, his voice filled with anger. "What's to stop him now?" "We're doing everything we can," Harper assured him. "But I need you and Emily to remain vigilant. If he violates the conditions, we'll act immediately." Ryan hung up, his mind racing. He immediately called Emily to relay the news, her reaction mirroring his own frustration and fear. "We can't go through this again," Emily said, her voice trembling. "I don't know if I can take it." "We'll get through it," Ryan said firmly. "We've come this far, and we're not letting him win." That evening, Ryan installed additional security measures around the house, including motion-activated lights and reinforced locks on the doors and windows. He couldn't shake the feeling that Zach was out there, watching, waiting for his moment. And he was right. 2 nights later, as Ryan sat in the living room reviewing work emails, he heard a faint noise outside. It was subtle, just a rustle, like leaves in the wind, but it was enough to put him on edge. He walked to the window, his heart pounding as he scanned the yard. At first, he saw nothing. But then, out of the corner of his eye, he caught a glimpse of movement near the fence. A dark figure was crouched in the shadows, barely visible in the dim light. Ryan's blood ran cold. It was Zach. He grabbed his phone and called the police, his voice low but urgent. "He's here," Ryan said. "He's in the yard." As he waited for the police to arrive, Ryan grabbed the baseball bat he kept by the door and positioned himself near the window. His eyes never left the figure outside, his adrenaline surging as he prepared for the worst. When the police arrived, their flashing lights illuminated the yard, and Zach bolted toward the fence. 2 officers gave chase, their shouts cutting through the night as Ryan and Emily watched from the window. Minutes later, the officers returned with Zach in handcuffs, his face twisted in anger and defiance. "This time, you're not getting away," one of the officers said as they led him to the patrol car. As Zach was driven away, Ryan and Emily stood in the doorway, their arms wrapped around each other. For the first time, they felt a sense of finality, a sense that the nightmare was truly over. In the days that followed, life began to return to normal. Zach was charged with multiple offenses, including breaking and entering, harassment, and violating the restraining order. This time, the judge denied bail, ensuring he would remain behind bars until his trial. Ryan and Emily focused on healing, both individually and as a family. They attended counseling sessions, worked on rebuilding trust, and prioritized creating a stable environment for Lily. It wasn't easy, but it was worth it. One evening, as they sat on the back porch watching the sunset, Emily turned to Ryan and smiled. "We made it," she said softly. Ryan nodded, his hand finding hers. "Yeah, we did." The journey had been harrowing, filled with moments of doubt and fear. But through it all, they had rediscovered something they thought they had lost: their strength, their resilience, and their love for the family they had built. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the yard in a warm golden glow, Ryan allowed himself to believe that the worst was behind them. Together, they could face anything. The weeks following Zach's incarceration brought a sense of calm that Ryan, Emily, and Lily hadn't experienced in what felt like an eternity. The constant tension that had weighed on them began to lift, and life slowly returned to a new normal. For Emily, the experience had been transformative. She threw herself into her work at the gallery, rediscovering her passion for art and finding solace in creating something meaningful. Her newfound independence wasn't just about physical space. It was about reclaiming a sense of self that she realized she had lost long before Zach entered their lives. Ryan, too, had changed. The ordeal had tested him in ways he never thought possible, forcing him to confront his own insecurities and the cracks in his marriage that he had ignored for years. But rather than dwell on the past, he focused on the future, on being the best father he could be for Lily and the strongest version of himself. One Saturday morning, Ryan and Emily met at a local park to spend the day with Lily. The three of them walked along the winding trails, the sun shining down as Lily darted ahead, her laughter ringing through the trees. For the first time in a long time, Ryan and Emily felt like they could breathe again. "Do you think she understands everything that's happened?" Emily asked, as they watched Lily climb a jungle gym. Ryan shook his head. "I think she knows something happened, but she's resilient. She's strong, like her mum." Emily smiled at the compliment, a warmth spreading through her chest, and like her dad. They sat in companionable silence for a moment, watching Lily play. It was a quiet but profound reminder of what they had fought to protect: their daughter, their family, and in some ways, each other. That afternoon, as they packed up their things and headed back to their cars, Emily paused, turning to Ryan. "I know we've been through a lot," she said, her voice steady but tinged with emotion. "But I'm grateful for everything you've done. For me, for Lily." Ryan met her gaze, his expression soft. "We've been through hell and back, but we made it, and I'll always be here for both of you." Emily nodded, a small but genuine smile on her face. It wasn't a perfect resolution, but it didn't need to be. They were both stronger now, and they had learned to face their challenges head-on. In the weeks that followed, Ryan and Emily continued to co-parent seamlessly, putting Lily's happiness above everything else. Their relationship, while different, was built on a newfound respect and understanding. They didn't need to be together romantically to be a team, and that realization brought them both a sense of peace. Zach, meanwhile, remained in custody as his trial loomed. The legal process would take time, but for Ryan and Emily, knowing he was behind bars was enough for now. They could finally move forward without the constant fear of his presence. One evening, Ryan sat on the porch of his house, a glass of iced tea in hand as he watched the sun set. Lily was inside, finishing her homework, and the house was filled with the comforting sounds of her humming and pencils scratching against paper. As the sky turned shades of orange and pink, Ryan reflected on everything they had endured. The fear, the anger, the uncertainty. It had all pushed him to his limits, but it had also shown him what he was capable of, and reminded him of the strength of his family. When Lily appeared in the doorway, her sketchbook in hand, Ryan smiled and motioned for her to join him. "What you working on, kiddo?" he asked as she climbed onto the porch swing beside him. "Just a drawing," Lily said, holding up the page. It was a picture of the three of them, Ryan, Emily, and Lily, standing together with a big sun overhead across the top. She had written the words, "Our family." Ryan felt his chest tighten as he looked at the drawing. It wasn't perfect, but it was a reflection of something that was, their bond, their resilience, their love. "It's beautiful," he said, ruffling her hair. Lily beamed, leaning against him as they watched the sun dip below the horizon. In that moment, Ryan knew they had finally found their way back to something whole, something strong. Their story wasn't over, it was just beginning. And so, as the credits roll on this chapter, let's take a moment to reflect. Life isn't always neat, and challenges don't always have clean resolutions. But with determination, love, and a willingness to fight for what matters, even the darkest times can lead to brighter days. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe to my channel. Your support means the world, and I can't wait to share more incredible stories with you. See you next time.